I've been putting off filming this video for way too long. Today it's time to talk about the books that I read in the month of June. Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Brianna and this is 4 Paws in a Book. I make bookish videos over here on my little corner of the internet, so if that's something that you're interested in, make sure that you hit the subscribe button down below. I read 22 books in the month of June and today we're going to talk about them. We are going to do it rapid fire because in June I hosted the Amazing Readathon. It's a little readathon. Don't know if you've heard about it. It's inspired by The Amazing Race. People read a lot of books, including myself. I didn't read as many this year as I did last year, which is an interesting little statistic, but I still read 22 books, and that's a lot of books. I vlogged every single book that I read this month, so I'm not going to be talking about these in like great detail, but I like to have a collective place to talk about all of the books that I read. I read 6,558 pages, which actually equals out to about 219 pages a day. That's a lot. That's a small book in one day. A lot of it had to do with the fact that I read a bunch of books over Face-Off weekend because I was reading short books, I was reading graphic novels, things like that. But still, I'm very impressed with the 22 books. I also took a lot of them off of my own physical TBR, so that's always a win. I had an average rating of 3.7, which is pretty high for me, honestly. Anything over a 3.5 I consider a win, so 3.7, we're doing good. I didn't get my first 5-star read until like the middle of the month, and I only had 2 for the entire month, but I had some good, like really good 4 stars, so like we were still thriving. I listened to 8 audiobooks. I read 2 books physically, I read 4 books via ebook, and then another 8 books were a mixture. Usually like that meant immersion reading, so I was reading physically along with the audiobook. I read 14 full-length novels, I read 6 novellas, and 2 graphic novels. I read 18 books targeted at an adult audience and 4 that were targeted at a YA audience. I surprisingly did not read any middle grade books in the month of June. My ratings were kind of all over the place. However, I did not have any 1 or 1.5 star reads. I did have 2 2-star reads. I had 5 3-star reads, 5 3.5 star reads, and 5 4-star reads. I had 2 4.5 star reads, and I lied. I had 3 5-star reads. My genres for June were very much all over the place, and that's because I was reading across all of the different genre teams for the Amazing Readathon. It gave me a really good like variety throughout the month, and I didn't burn out. However, there were definitely some times where like I would have preferred to be on a different team. Like fantasy romance is calling my name and I cannot wait to get back to it. So I read 4 contemporaries, 1 fantasy, 4 fantasy romance, 3 horror, 4 romance, 4 sci-fi, and 2 thriller. Alright, so those are the nerdy statistics. Let's talk about the books. Like I said, I will be doing this pretty quickly, and I'm going to be starting with the book that I like the least, working my way up to the book that I liked the most. So my most disappointing read of the entire month was 100% Beneath the Alabaster Spire by Alison Carr Wechter. I read Dark Knight Golden Dawn earlier, right before Polycon, and absolutely loved it. 5 stars, like best book of the month. Really resonated with that book. I have a thing for like characters trauma bonding. I love that, and this is the second book in that series, so I had very high expectations for it, and it very much disappointed me. This book is like 100% just smut. Every time you turn around, they're doing it. And it had to do with like the magic, and it was like they were literally magically attracted to each other, and that was never explained. So I don't really know. It was just, there wasn't anything like really building on the story. I am interested enough to continue on. I'm going to finish out the series because it's just a trilogy, and it felt like maybe it was a duology that needed to be stretched into a trilogy for some reason or another. We stretched it too thin, I think. I didn't feel the same character development that we had in the first book, and it let me down. It disappointed me. Like I said, all of my initial thoughts are going to be in those vlogs. I'll have the entire playlist linked down below. I also gave it 2 stars to Reset by Serena Dalhan. I could be saying that wrong. This is a like utopian style book. I didn't understand this one very much. This one I think had a really interesting and unique concept. I had a lot of discussion in my vlog about this one. But this is about this society where like every 7 years, I think it was, your mind literally is reset. So you don't have any like prejudices. You don't have, there's no like racism. There's no, you know, thoughts of war and stuff like that, because like you literally, your minds are reset every 7 years. But also that means that your friendships and your family and your like your partner is reset every 7 years. And then there are these people that are dreamers, and they can actually like kind of see past the memory reset, and they can remember things that happened. And there is this guy that like is like, I was married to you in a previous like reset. It struck me as very misogynistic. It wasn't creative enough. If you're going to have this futuristic society, it would be great to have some queer representation in here. Or there was like one conversation about being poly, but like no queer representation, not like nothing. It was very much like, this is the status quo and this is the norm. So even in our like utopian society, we are still going to like, we're still going to have a male and female partner. And I don't know, like I think that this book could have said a lot of things, and it just didn't. And also I was really bored the entire time. Moving on to my 3 stars, I gave 3 stars to Cassandra in Reverse by Holly Small. This one I think was comped as similar to Una Out of Order. I don't think that that's a very good comp. I think the better comp is actually Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine, because other than this like Groundhog Day of like reliving your life over and over again, it's very much not a time travel book. And really, like Una Out of Order is actually a time travel book, right? That one is a book where they are like, she's living a different year of her life. So instead of going from 23 to 24 to 25, she goes from 23 to 36 to 25 to like what, like it's just, it's out of order. This one is truly a Groundhog Day, and that is not a favorite trope of mine because it can get really redundant and really boring because of the repetition of it. If the author is not doing anything new and unique with the Groundhog Day trope. Christina Lauren does one, I think it's called In a Holidays. That's a really interesting Groundhog Day because it actually has like a lot of differences in the Groundhog Day aspect. This one did not. There were some times where she would literally, because she could figure out how to reset the day, she, like, our chapter would be literally half a page long because she'd be like, nope, I said the wrong thing, reset. And it just, I don't know, it got repetitive and boring. But this does have really good autistic representation. Our main character does find out that she is autistic throughout the course of the book. And I think that that representation was done really well in kind of a really dry British humor way, which some people may not like because obviously like the Brits have a very, very dry sense of humor. When you're talking about neurodivergence and you're just kind of like laughing it off, that could feel a little bit jarring. And it's not until like closer to the end where she's like, oh, my hyperfixation about the like Greek gods, Cassandra, the Greek goddess Cassandra, like actually probably meant something more than just being quirky. There's some good things and some bad things to this. If you don't hate the Groundhog Day trope, this might be a book that will really work for you. I also gave 3 stars to Bonesmith. This was actually the first book that I read in the month, so I don't actually remember much of it. But this book is about this world where if people are not, when they die, if they're not buried correctly, they can come back to life, necromancy kind of thing, and our main character is like kind of here to put a stop to that, and she has to save her tribe, her group from you know, the necromancers. And I think the magic system in this was really, really interesting. The idea of like if someone was mortally wounded, you know, if they were stabbed in the gut, then the bone that is closest to that mortal wound is the one that has the most power, the most magic, and that was just really interesting and unique. My biggest issue with this is that it kind of read as a very like young YA with very complex like magic system world building, and like there was a disconnect there because we had this complex magic system, this complex story, but then very young feeling characters, and that just like there was a disconnect for me. This book truly was like a book that existed and I read it. There was nothing fantastic about it. Another book that I gave 3 stars, and it is also a book that I read and it exists. I said that backwards. A book that exists and I read it. Was What Feast at Night by T. Kingfisher. I really, really enjoyed What Moves the Dead when I read it. I think it was last year. I think that the atmosphere was just haunting and stunning. It was so quietly terrifying. And I think this one just never captured that like haunting atmosphere and vibe that we had in What Moves the Dead. I know that a lot of people really loved this book, and I'm sad that I didn't. This is also a book that I read during Face Off weekend, so like it was kind of a fever dream, but I just never got the same emotion that I got out of the first book. I also gave it 3 stars to Doctor Who, the 11th Doctor comic strip. This is called Afterlife, and this is the first book in like a series, and this like, I don't know, what can I say about this one? It doesn't follow like an actual storyline from the show, which means that the companion is different, the aliens were different, and I felt it was very disconnected from the show. I don't know where in the timeline that this actually fits because of the people that are around the Doctor. Other than like it happens to the 11th Doctor, I didn't connect with anything else in the story. It's very episodic. Like I think there's 4 different stories in here that kind of build on each other, but also kind of stand alone. So it does feel like maybe like a 4-episode little character arc, story arc, which I appreciated. And then the graphics are really, really stunning. They kind of look like a classic comic book, but like with so many colors and stuff like that. This was another book that I read for Face Off. Read it very, very quickly. Lastly, I gave 3 stars to Blackout. This is by a bunch of different authors: Danielle Clayton, Tiffany D. Jackson, Nick Stone, Angie Thomas, Ashley Woodfolk, and Nicola Yoon. And this is an anthology that all happens at the same time. Think of like the book form of the movie, like New Year's Day, Valentine's Day, where like everybody's having their own little story, and then at the very end somehow they all connect. That's kind of what this felt like. And I think teenage me would have eaten this up. I think it would have been very groundbreaking. It would have been very entertaining. But as a 34-year-old woman, I can see the value in it. I can see like how it was a fun and entertaining time, but I never really got enough out of any of the characters because it has a very large cast of characters because it's a bunch of short stories. And so because of that, it's like very quick and you're kind of like in someone's life for a second and then you go jump to somebody else. That's kind of the reason I don't love short stories in the first place, is because we never dive deep enough. And it's like we would start getting the story arc of, you know, this character that's like, oh, you know, maybe I'm queer, and my best friend that like we were just friends, I actually kind of like her and she's cute, but then like immediately we would jump to another story. And so it just, I don't know, it felt disjointed. And even at the end when everything like kind of wrapped up and kind of came together, I didn't get enough of a payoff. Definitely a book that like I would recommend if you are a school librarian, you have teenagers in your life, like this could be a really, really good book for them because it's a fun summer read while also dealing with some like, you know, difficult teenage topics. Moving on to my 3.5-star reads. The first one was Technically Yours by Denise Williams. This is the 3rd book that I've read from Denise Williams now. I really, really loved The Fastest Way to Fall. Unfortunately, that was the first one that I read from her, and since then I have yet to find the same magic in any of her books. This isn't the worst one. The other one, the Do You Take This Man, I think is what it was called. That one is by far my least favorite, but this one was just kind of like very mid. It was aggressively mid. I liked his POV character, but like she was really, really boring, really shallow, really surface level. I'm not saying that the character was shallow in terms of like she you know was basic and like shallow things. I'm saying that we like never learned anything about her. Which was really frustrating. This is a second chance romance, but we never really understand why A, they broke up in the first place, and like B, why they can't be back together. It was just a very the reason why they weren't together or couldn't be together just never really made sense. So a book that I honestly don't remember much of. It was week 1 of the readathon. I don't remember much about it, and that means it was a very mid book. I gave 3.5 stars to Something Is Killing the Children, Volume 1. I read this during Face Off weekend. I will definitely continue on with this series. This had a really like Stranger Things vibe to it, also with like the small town murder mystery detective thing going on. It was very much a setup book. We were just introduced to a lot of the characters that were going to be players throughout the series, but it is one that I definitely want to continue on. The artwork was stunning, loved it, and my library has all of the volumes, so I will at least be able to read them on Libby. I also gave 3.5 stars to Shark Heart by Emily Habeck. This is like, I classified it as contemporary because it definitely feels slice of life, but it also has like a kind of a sci-fi aspect to it as well. In this world, instead of getting a diagnosis like cancer or Alzheimer's or something like that, you could get a diagnosis of this mutation where you literally turn into another animal. In our main character's case, he turns into a shark. And he starts like, you know, having gills, and he's like drinking a ton of water, and like it kind of like progressively like goes into like him being quite literally a great white shark. And the story looks at this couple, this man who has this diagnosis along with his wife. They just got married in the last year when he gets the diagnosis, and it kind of follows their marriage as they deal with this diagnosis and with this mutation. And it's a really interesting metaphor to like a terminal illness diagnosis and how you react to that, how like you as a loved one would react to it. And that's a really hard topic to tackle as an author, especially as a debut author. This book is a debut, and like that's a hard topic to tackle, and I don't know that it was done super well. A for effort, but the execution was just not quite there. I think that the author really could have dove deep into the grief that goes along with a diagnosis like this, the emotion, the anger, the frustration, the sadness, the like trying to hang on to every last minute you have with your partner before the inevitable. And we started to do that, but then we would backtrack, and there was also this like flashback scene with our main character's wife, who has a history with this disease from like the past, and like it became too much for what this book was trying to do. I think it would have actually been more powerful if we would have stayed close and quiet and just handled the two characters and their inner circle as they were going through this. Because as we stepped back and we stepped out into other storylines, I kind of got lost, but more so I wasn't as connected. I wasn't as invested in the story and in these characters when we would go off and look at other things. I gave it 3.5 stars to The Merry Spinster, Tales of Everyday Horror by Daniel M. Lavery. This takes a bunch of folk tales and fairy tales, like things like The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Cinderella, Frog and Toad, which became Mole and Toad, turns them on their head. Everything is just a little bit off kilter, everything is a little haunting, and everything is very gay. Very gay. It takes a look at gender and sexism and classism and societal roles of gender, and just really turns everything on their head. There was one story in particular that I was really engaged with, where it was talking about how this couple would decide if you were going to be the wife or the husband. It didn't matter like what gender you were or what sex you were. It was like, are you going to take the wife role or the husband role? And I don't know, like that was just something that was just so different from society and like from today's world, that it was just like interesting, unique to say the least. I do think that I might be too dumb for this book because there were times where the stories, like obviously folk tales and these old classic stories have a lesson. They always have a point to them. And there were some where I was just like, okay, that was a cool story, an interesting story, but like, why were you telling me this way? I didn't get the story. I didn't get the reasoning behind the story. Again, short stories are never my favorite because they just don't have the depth and the nuance that you can get from a full-length novel. I say they can't or they don't. That's a blanket statement, but the likelihood of being able to just really dive into a story is harder in a short story collection. Absolutely appreciate what this book was trying to do. It just wasn't a Brie book. Lastly, the final book of the Amazing Readathon I gave 3.5 stars, and that was The Circus Infinite by Con Wong, and this is the space circus. This character is on the run because he has these magical abilities and people are hunting him. He can manipulate gravity in a way, like just in a small space. So kind of like a telekinetic, can like move people or move things. He can affect the gravity around somebody. And that makes him kind of a powerful weapon. And so he's on the run from people that are trying to research him and trying to, use his powers for not great things. And he finds a circus, and he's like, well, the people at the circus, they're kind of freaks. I fit in, okay? People will not ask me questions. And, he joins the circus, and this becomes his act. The planet that he is on is a very like highly sexualized planet. They use sex for transactions, they use sex for pleasure, they use sex for making deals, like whatever, like everything is done in a very sexually charged manner. And our character is asexual. He's also an empath, and so he can actually like understand people's emotions when he's around them. And so being Ace and being on this planet that is very sexually charged is causing him a lot of anxiety because he's like, I don't really want to be in your head, but it's a thing that happens and I can't really control it. There is a lot of representation in this book, tons of queer representation, specifically Ace representation, and this is talked about a lot in this book. And while I love that, I love seeing representation in books. That is one of the things that I champion here on this channel. I think that it wasn't as seamless as it could have been. I mean, we're in a sci-fi world. We can have a queer norm society. They talked about him being Ace and then like questioning why he wanted to be in a romantic relationship with someone and how like you could still be asexual but not a romantic. And it was trying to educate the reader rather than trying to just have a story. And sometimes when a book is trying to basically educate a reader on sexuality or gender or like whatever, it sometimes will take you out of the story, and I think that's what this did because it talked about it a lot. I don't want you to take that in the way of like, oh, I think we should have less representation, because like obviously that is not what I'm trying to say. It did it at the expense of the story. We had life and death stakes. Obviously he is on the run, like someone's trying to hurt him and kill him and like use his power for evil, and then in the middle of it we had to like basically stop and have this conversation that didn't feel natural because we are in the future. We are in a society where like he is not the only Ace person around, so it didn't make sense that the characters were like having discussions about it. It's really hard to toe that line as an author, and I wouldn't want to do that. Kudos to like all authors for even attempting it. It's not easy to do, and this is a debut, and so obviously that skill comes with practice. I will read something else from this author in the future, and I like really appreciated the representation. I just wish it would have been done a little bit more naturally. Moving on to my 4-star reads. My first one is An Unkindness of Ghost by River Solomon. This is the book that Brittany and I read for the Accidental Book Club, and I really liked this book. This was very different than what I think I was expecting going into it, because I knew it was like sci-fi, it takes place on this big ship, and like there's a lot of discussion of classism and racism, and there's essentially 26 decks, and as you go farther down the decks, the worse the classism gets, to the point where like they're talking different languages on these different decks of the ship that is basically carrying humanity after the destruction of Earth. And it's trying to paint this metaphor of the antebellum South in like a sci-fi futuristic element, which I loved the premise of that. This book kind of takes place in I think three or four parts, and part one I was very confused by. I think that this book doesn't necessarily do world building that well, but it does character development and story really well. So because of that I was a little bit confused at the beginning, because we were literally like googling how big the ship would be in terms of like, you know, Star Trek or Babylon 5 or something like that in reference, and trying to like figure out how to picture this, because the book wasn't explaining it well enough. But at the same time, the world building and the setting of this book is not what's important. The message behind the story, the characters, the actual plot of the book is much more important. And you kind of see that. Like, you see that the author is focusing on what they think is important. And that's not describing the ship. Unfortunately, me as like a world building kind of like reader and want to know everything about what's going on around our characters, I was looking for that, but that's not what the author wanted to do. And because of that, I think this book would be really good for people who don't read a lot of sci-fi, or maybe want to get into sci-fi, because the focus of this book is not the science, the tech, the space. Essentially, it is this revolution and this character trying to dismantle the absolutely like racist policies, the patriarchy, everything. This is essentially creating this like next civil war, but in space. I also gave a 4 stars to The Clinic by Kate Quinn. This one I'm going to put a caveat in that if you work in mental health, if you work in like any form of psychology or sociology, you're gonna hate this book, because I definitely had to like turn that part of my brain off. Granted, I have not really focused on psychology in a decade since I graduated college, but that was my major, so like I have a little bit of knowledge about it. This book is wacky, it is crazy, it is fun. There are so many plot twists. You don't know what's going on from one moment to the next. This is about a mental health hospital, like a detox facility essentially, that is doing some very shady things. Like very shady things. And let me tell you, they would be shut down so quickly if it was actually happening. Because you have very famous people here. Like that's like a celebrity rehab center essentially, like rich people, and knowing that the shady things would not fly under the radar for very long, but it kind of made this like extra dramatic element to it where you just like had no idea what was going on, and it was like very LA rich people shenanigans. Our main character goes into this rehab center because her sister was there and she died, but they didn't give her any reason why. They didn't do an autopsy. They wouldn't let her see her body. Like it was just very sketchy. So her being like, you know, also a little bit of a drug addict, goes into this rehab clinic basically to investigate for herself, to see what happened to her sister. And the ending of this book is so bonkers that I did not know which way was up. I read this book right before Face Off started, and so like I was trying to rush to get it done, but I mean I was like literally like standing outside, I was watering the garden, and I'm like, how did we get there? But like not in a way of like the author didn't know what they were doing and so like they were lost and so therefore you were lost. No, it was just because it was so like absolutely bananas. It came so far out of left field, but then when you trace it back, you're like, oh, I see what the author did here. I think that this book was so smart, so well done. It's a little bit too long. The pacing slogged a little bit in the middle because we were trying to have this like sister moment and like also trying to like deal with her own stuff in her own life, and like I didn't care about any of that. I just wanted like the twisty drama. But I understand why you need it. I just think that the book was just slightly too long. And that's the only reason it didn't get 5 stars. I gave it 4 stars to Sanguin by Sierra Simone. I read this during Face Off weekend. Listen, this is just gay vampire smut. There's no plot to this. There's nothing, okay? It's just a fun, smutty time. This is about a grumpy vampire on vacation, and he's just like, I just want to like chill. I want to read my book. I want to, you know, drink a little blood, like, you know, I just want to do vacation things. And then this priest comes to his door to kill him, and instead he fucks him. It's Sierra Simone god tier smut, and like I would love a full-length novel of these characters. Okay, thank you, Sierra. I would love that. I don't know if you have any plans to do that, but like, can I put in a request? Anyways, this is also my 100th book of the year, which like if that's not on brand for me, I don't know what is. Another novella that I gave 4 stars to was The Honeymoon Crashers by Christina Lauren. This is a sequel to The Unhoneymooners, and it follows the sister, like the sister that was supposed to originally be getting married in The Unhoneymooners. Turns out her husband was like actually like a cheating asshole, so she dumps him, and then our main character from The Unhoneymooners and her fiance go to Hawaii for their wedding, and she meets a local guy. It's really cute. It's definitely like, it's just a fun smutty time because it's very short. I think the audiobook was only like 3 hours long or something like that. I don't even think that there is a physical book of this. I think it's just an audiobook, and it has a full cast. It's one of those like more like radio drama type stories where you kind of hear the waves in the background and stuff like that, which is a fun time. It's definitely harder to read those quickly. Like you have to slow it down a little bit past your normal listening speed, but it was still really good and really sweet, and yeah, I love these characters. My last 4-star read was also Sierra Simone, and that was A Lesson in Thorns. This is the first book in the Thorn Chapel series, and this is dark academia, but make it really smutty. Okay, if you liked If We Were Villains and you wanted them to have sex, that's this book. That's this book. It's queer, it's poly, all of our characters have some sort of traumatic backstory, some religious trauma that they are dealing with. I don't think that I love this book as much as most people do, and it's definitely not my favorite series from Sierra. It definitely has to go to Priest, but it still was a really good time. The smut, again, god tier. There's a lot of characters in this, and I would have liked to have like some sort of like character map, but yeah, still a very good time. Moving on to my 4.5-star reads, I had 2 of them. The first one was the Frederick Bachman novella, And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer. something like that. Here's the cover. This book is just devastatingly sad. I will say I did not cry in this book, but also I'm a robot and I don't cry in books. I can see why people do. This book is about an older gentleman who has Alzheimer's or dementia, and he is just saying goodbye to the people in his life and doing it in a way where it is appropriate for age groups, for the young boy that he is with, and it was really, really sad. Frederick Bachman has a way of like reaching in and like taking your heart and like twisting it and just breaking it apart. It's very much in the same vein as A Man Called Ove. Same emotions for that. It's a book that like everyone on BookTube has read at this point. It was the last book that I read for Face Off Weekend. And then I also gave 4.5 stars to Here We Go Again by Alison Cochrane. This is her newest book, and this also has a character where he has Alzheimer's. And this is about two girls who were friends in high school. They had a falling out because of a misunderstanding where one girl thought the other girl was straight and she really wasn't. She kissed her and then like went off and like started dating a boy on the football team. And they didn't ever talk about it. Because of that, they ended up having this resentment towards each other for years and years and years and years. Anyways, they both were in the class of this older gentleman, Joe. He was a teacher for them and then became this mentor because now they're both teachers. And he is dying. And he wants to make this last cross-country road trip to die in his home in Maine, on the other side of the country, or his like family home. And they go on this journey, this road trip. And I don't normally like road trip books, okay guys? Like I don't, okay? This is a well-known established fact, but this was so well done. This book also almost made me cry. It was such a beautiful look at life and death and dealing with that. Honestly, the romance in this book was my least favorite part of the book. This was like more, I wanted Joe's story. I would like Joe's prequel, please and thank you. But yeah, the romance was like my least favorite part of it. There's a lot of self-discovery in this book. There is a lot of discussion of like finding yourself. Our one character has been like let go from her contract as a teacher, so she has no idea what she's doing the next year. And so there's just a lot of like trying to find yourself, and then like also reconnecting with someone who like knew you in a very vulnerable time in your life and like rediscovering all of that. So beautiful book. Definitely some triggers for like Alzheimer's and dealing with the death of a loved one and like watching that happen, the progression of that happening. Okay, let's move on to my 5-star reads. The first one that I had literally happened during Face Off Weekend, and that was The Scepter by J. Bree. This is the prequel novella to The Crown of Oaths and Curses. This is the first book that I've read from J. Bree. Will not be the last. I wanted to read the second prequel novella at some point during the month of June. It didn't happen, so we'll see if I can get to it in July or August, but her writing is so gorgeous. It's descriptive without being purple prosy. It is just so phenomenal. I cannot wait to read more from her. These prequel novellas kind of look at our main characters before they meet each other, and they're kind of like stories before the story actually begins. It was like about 100 pages. It was just enough time to like get this glimpse into the character to know what you were getting out of the rest of the book, or the rest of the series. And yeah, I can't wait. I also gave it 5 stars to Death by Fire by S.C. Muir. This is a book that like, I don't know that I would necessarily recommend to everybody, but it kind of worked for me. It was like a right book, right time kind of thing. This is a fantasy romance with a marriage of convenience, or like a political marriage. So basically the clans, the 4 kingdoms used to be together, and then a sorcerer kind of divided their magic. So we have life and death and fire and water, fire and ice, I can't remember. And I can't find the book to save my life. I have no idea where I put it. Yeah, I'm deep cleaning my house this weekend. Hopefully I find it. But anyways, we have 2 different clans that are coming together for a political marriage, and these 2 characters have never met each other. They don't know anything about each other, and then they get married. So the first time that they meet is like at their wedding, and it's awkward and cute and adorable, and they're like trying to have conversations to get to know each other. And so there's a lot of these like quiet moments, but then also there's this like political revolutions happening in the background, and these protesters and these like there's like family dynamics and like backstabbing, cutthroat politics, all of the buzzwords for me. Do I think that this is like a masterpiece of literature? No, but I still had like such a good time reading it. And this was the first book that I read physically that was not a graphic novel in a really, really long time. And I don't know if that like helped with the enjoyment of this book. I don't know. But I did buy the sequel that I'm gonna be reading soon. And then my favorite book of the month was The One by John Mars. I went back and started at the beginning of this, and I'd read The Passengers previously. I didn't know that it was all kind of connected in this world, so I am gonna go back and read The Passengers again, because I read it like at a time where I didn't necessarily like, I wasn't enjoying anything. I was kind of in a life slump, and it was several years ago. And so then everybody started reading it in the past year or two and was really enjoying it. And so I was like, I feel like I missed some things. I want to read it again. But this book is about this dating app, and a bunch of people are using this dating app, and this basically uses your DNA to find your soulmate. And you're following a bunch of different characters where like there's an engaged couple that's like, maybe we should take it to see if we're actually soulmates. And so then like you have the repercussions of that, of like what happens if you aren't your soulmate, but like do you still get married? And then there's like the creator of the app finds a match. And then there's like just a bunch of different characters that are all like, they all have these different things, the events that happen to them because of this dating app. For a large part of this book, I was confused as to why we were calling it a thriller, and everyone was like, oh, this is the most, you know, this is a fast-paced, thrilling book. And I was like, it's a social commentary book, a social experiment book, but I wouldn't necessarily classify it as a thriller until we got to like the 65-70% mark. And then I was like, oh, I see the thrilling part. I think that if you like this book, you will also like The Measure by Nikki Erlich. This book is not as thrilling. It is more social commentary, social experiment kind of thing, but it also has a bunch of different characters that are dealing with, this one in this case is that you find out how long your life is based on like a string that's in a box, but kind of the same social experiment of like, what happens if one person looks in the box, and what does that mean for your life, and what does it mean for your marriage and stuff. It's like so similar aspect of this, but like maybe less of a life and death situation, because it's not actually talking about the length of your life. It's just talking about like who you should be falling in love with scientifically. I love books that deal with the psychology of humans and how they interact with each other. Obviously, I said I was a psych major, so this is definitely like something that should be right up my alley, and it worked for me. Like, it so worked for me. John Mars might become my new hyperfixation for the year. Last year was Darcy Coates, right? I read Voices in the Snow, and then like I read 10 of her books in 2023, and I feel like John Mars could be the author of 2024 that becomes my hyperfixation, and I read 10 of his books in the second half of the year. Who knows what, you know, I don't know. Favorite book of the month. Those are the books that I read in June. Let me know down in the comments below your favorite book of the month of June. If you're not feeling chatty, do a sun emoji, because it's over 100 degrees Fahrenheit here today, and it's hot. Especially with all my lights on. If you want to watch the vlogs for the Amazing Readathon, I'm going to put the playlist here so you can watch everything. This will have my live in-depth thoughts of everything that I read in June. Everything I just talked about. Live in-depth thoughts. Plus some fun things. That's all I have for you today. If you're new here and you have not yet subscribed, there's a little button that you can do so down below the video. If you'd like to hang out with me more, the links to my Instagram, Goodreads, Twitter, and my Patreon are linked in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!